Mayday, Mayday. This is research vessel Aurora calling any station. We have a researcher in the water, Orca pod, aggressive behavior. Oh my god. The whale has her. Send help now. Position 48.5 north, 123.4 west. This is not a drill. In the pristine waters of the Pacific Northwest, beneath a deceptively calm October sky, what began as a routine research dive would become a nightmare that would shake the marine biology community to its core. Vanessa Doyle was 31 years old, a rising star in the field of cetacean research with a particular passion for orcas, the ocean's apex predators. She had spent 7 years studying these magnificent creatures, believing she understood their language, their behaviors, their souls. She had no idea that in just 47 minutes, the animals she loved more than life itself would turn her deepest passion into her final, horrifying moments on Earth. The morning of October 15, 2023, started like hundreds before it. The research vessel Aurora bobbed gently in the waters off Vancouver Island. Vanessa had just finished her morning coffee, excited about diving with K-Pod, a family of orcas she'd been documenting for 3 years. She'd named each member, knew their personalities, their hunting patterns. She called them her family. But something was different that morning. Something the sensors didn't pick up. Something the hydrophones couldn't detect. The pod had been hunting unsuccessfully for days. They were hungry, stressed, and their behavior patterns had shifted in ways that would only become clear in the investigation that followed. Vanessa's research partner, Dr. Marcus Chen, would later testify that he'd noticed unusual vocalizations that morning. Sounds he'd never heard in 15 years of orca research. But Vanessa was already suiting up, eager to get in the water with what she considered the most misunderstood creatures in the ocean. This is Vanessa Doyle's story. A story of love turned lethal, trust betrayed by nature, and the moment when the ocean's most intelligent predators reminded us why they're called killer whales. You're watching Animal Attack Files, where we bring you the most shocking real-life animal encounters from around the world. If this story grips you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see these majestic creatures forever. This isn't just another wildlife documentary, this is the harrowing truth about what happens when humans forget that no matter how much we think we understand nature, we're still just visitors in their world. In the next few minutes, you'll hear from the colleagues who tried to save her, the experts who analyzed every second of footage, and the witnesses who still wake up screaming from what they saw that October morning. But most importantly, you'll understand why Vanessa Doyle's final moments serve as a critical warning to every person who believes they've formed a special bond with Earth's most powerful predators. Vanessa Doyle wasn't just another marine biologist. She was the researcher who made international headlines when she became the first person to successfully decode 17 distinct orca vocalizations, breakthrough research that earned her the prestigious Hub's SeaWorld Research Institute Award at just 29 years old. Her colleagues at the Pacific Marine Mammal Center called her the Orca Whisperer, a title she wore with equal parts pride and responsibility. Born in 1992 in Seattle, Washington, Vanessa grew up in the shadow of Puget Sound, where her fascination with marine life began at age 6 when her grandfather, a retired Navy sonar operator, took her whale watching for the first time. That day, when a massive bull orca surfaced just feet from their boat, sending spray across her delighted face, she turned to her grandfather and announced with the certainty only a child can possess, "I'm going to swim with them someday, Grandpa. They're trying to talk to us." Her childhood wasn't typical. While other kids collected baseball cards or played video games, Vanessa filled notebooks with whale drawings and orcapod family trees. Her parents, David and Patricia Doyle, both teachers at Lincoln High School, encouraged their daughter's passion but worried about her single-minded focus. Patricia would later tell investigators, Vanessa never saw danger in those animals. Even as a child, when we'd watch documentaries showing orcas hunting seals, she'd say they were just being misunderstood. She'd insist they would never hurt a human who respected them. By high school, Vanessa was already volunteering at the Seattle Aquarium, spending every weekend and summer learning from marine biologists. Her supervisor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, remembered her as intensely dedicated but sometimes recklessly brave. I once caught her trying to feed the harbor seals without protective gear. When I scolded her, she said, "But Elena, they know me. They know I'm not a threat." Vanessa, brilliant, passionate, but she anthropomorphized these animals to a dangerous degree. At the University of Washington, Vanessa double-majored in marine biology and animal psychology, graduating summa cum laude in just 3 years. Her thesis, Emotional Intelligence in Orcinus Orca, Evidence for Complex Social Emotions, challenged conventional thinking about orca cognition. Her professor, Dr. James Hartwell, called it groundbreaking but concerningly idealistic. He noted Vanessa's work was exceptional, but she consistently downplayed the predatory nature of these animals. In her thesis defense, she actually argued that orcas possessed a moral code that would prevent them from harming humans who approached them with proper respect. After graduation, Vanessa immediately joined the Pacific Marine Mammal Center's Orca research program. Within 2 years, she became the youngest lead researcher in the center's history. Her colleagues described her as fearless to the point of worry. Dr. Marcus Chin, who would become her research partner and closest friend, recalled their first dive together. The protocol was to maintain at least 100 feet distance from the pod. I looked over and Vanessa was maybe 30 feet away from a full-grown female. When we surfaced, I asked her what the hell she was thinking. She just smiled and said, "Kiska invited me closer. Didn't you hear her call?" That's when I knew Vanessa operated on a different level than the rest of us, for better or worse. Her personal life revolved entirely around her work. She lived alone in a small apartment in Victoria, British Columbia, its walls covered with orca photographs and hydrophone spectrograms. She had ended a 3-year relationship with fellow researcher Tom Bradley just 6 months before her death because, as Tom later explained, I was competing with 50-ton animals for her attention, and I was losing. She'd cancel dates to analyze vocalizations, spend our vacations following pods. The orcas weren't just her job, they were her entire world. Vanessa's mother Patricia revealed that her daughter had recently confided something troubling during their last phone conversation. She said she felt like she was finally being accepted as part of the pod. She used the word family repeatedly. When I suggested that was anthropomorphism, she got angry with me. She said, "Mom, you don't understand. They recognize me now. Yesterday, Kiska brought her calf right up to me. That's trust. That's love." I should have been more worried, but Vanessa was always so confident. Friends describe Vanessa as charismatic but increasingly isolated. Sarah Mitchell, her best friend since college, noticed changes in the months before the attack. She started speaking about the orcas like they were people. She'd say things like, "Raven is jealous of her sister," or "Tsunami is depressed today." When I visited her last summer, she spent 3 hours showing me videos of conversations she claimed to be having with them underwater. It was fascinating but also unsettling. She genuinely believed they were communicating complex emotions to her. But it was Vanessa's unshakable belief in interspecies connection that drove her groundbreaking research. She had published 12 peer-reviewed papers on orca communication, each one bringing her closer to her ultimate goal, proving that orcas possessed emotional complexity equal to humans. Her final paper, published just 2 weeks before her death, was titled Beyond Instinct: Evidence for Emotional Decision-Making in Wild Orca Populations. In it, she wrote what would become chillingly prophetic words: "To truly understand these magnificent beings, we must be willing to enter their world not as observers, but as participants. Only when we shed our human fears and preconceptions can we hope to achieve genuine interspecies communication." Dr. Robert Pittman, a renowned orca expert who had reviewed her work, later reflected, "Vanessa was brilliant, no question. But she suffered from What I call, researchers' hubris, the belief that scientific understanding somehow translates to special protection. She forgot that no matter how much we study them, orcas remain apex predators with millions of years of hunting instinct hardwired into their DNA. Her empathy for these animals was both her greatest strength and, ultimately, her fatal weakness. The weekend before her death, Vanessa had attended her nephew's 5th birthday party. Her sister, Rebecca, recalled she was showing him videos of her orcas on her phone. She told him, "These are my best friends, buddy. Someday, when you're older, Aunt Vanessa will introduce you to them." The way she said it, it was like she was talking about bringing him to meet her neighbors, not wild predators. That level of comfort, that complete absence of fear, looking back, it terrifies me. Yet those who knew Vanessa best would later say that dying any other way would have been wrong for her. As her father David would tearfully tell reporters, "My daughter lived for those whales." In her mind, she was never in danger because she was swimming with family. Even now, knowing what happened, I don't think she would have chosen differently. That was Vanessa, brave, brilliant, and absolutely convinced that love could conquer even the most primal instincts. Orcas are the ocean's most intelligent predators, combining the cognitive abilities of dolphins with the hunting prowess of great white sharks. In the wild, they employ sophisticated hunting strategies that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. These apex predators have no natural enemies and have been documented killing everything from fish to blue whales. Despite their friendly appearance and performances in marine parks, orcas possess the most powerful bite force of any marine mammal, over 19,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone like paper. The specific pod that would change Vanessa's life forever was known to researchers as K-pod, part of the northern resident orca community that inhabits the waters between Vancouver Island and mainland British Columbia. This particular family group consisted of 12 individuals across 3 generations, led by a 47-year-old matriarch. The research team had designated K11, though Vanessa had given her the name Grandmother Moon for the distinctive white scarring on her dorsal fin. K-pod had first been catalogued in 1973, making them one of the longest-studied orca families in the Pacific Northwest. For 50 years, they had maintained predictable patterns, feeding primarily on Chinook salmon, following ancient migration routes, and showing remarkable stability in their social structure. Marine biologists considered them a textbook pod, exhibiting all the classic behaviors that made northern residents distinct from their more aggressive transient cousins who hunted marine mammals. Vanessa first encountered K-pod 3 years before her death during a routine population survey. According to her field notes from July 17, 2020, the meeting was magical and transformative. She wrote, "At 14:32, adult female K-16 approached our vessel with her 2-year-old calf. Instead of the typical avoidance behavior, she spy-hopped repeatedly, maintaining eye contact for an extraordinary 47 seconds. I've never experienced such deliberate acknowledgement from a wild orca. It felt like recognition, like invitation." From that day forward, Vanessa made K-pod the focus of her research. She spent over 800 hours observing them, both from research vessels and underwater. Her dedication was obsessive. She could identify each pod member by their calls alone, knew their hunting preferences, their play behaviors, their social dynamics. She gave them all names: Grandmother Moon the matriarch, her daughter Storm Singer, the massive male Tsunami, the playful adolescent raven, and most notably, K-16, whom Vanessa named Kiska, meaning pure in Russian. For nearly 3 years, the relationship between Vanessa and K-pod seemed to validate her theories about interspecies communication. Documented hundreds of what she classified as intentional interactions. Kiska, in particular, appeared to seek out Vanessa during dives. The orca would often position herself vertically in the water column, a behavior called spy-hopping, whenever Vanessa entered the water. Other pod members would vocalize in specific patterns that Vanessa believed were directed at her. but experts were growing concerned about the increasingly intimate nature of these interactions. Dr. John Ford, the leading authority on Pacific Northwest orcas, personally visited Vanessa's research station in March 2023. His subsequent report to the Marine Mammal Center's board was alarming. Dr. Doyle is allowing dangerous familiarity to develop between herself and K-pod. During my observation, adult female K-16 made physical contact with Dr. Doyle on 3 occasions, including what appeared to be investigative jaw-popping behavior. When I raised safety concerns, Dr. Doyle dismissed them, stating that Kiska is simply greeting me the way she would a pod member. This anthropomorphism is extremely concerning. The warning signs had actually begun months earlier. In December 2022, K-pod's hunting success rate had dropped dramatically. Trail cameras and hydrophone data showed they were catching 60% fewer salmon than in previous years. The pod began exhibiting stress behaviors, increased surface activity, atypical vocalizations, and most concerning, they started approaching fishing vessels more aggressively, behavior typically associated with food desperation. Vanessa documented these changes but interpreted them through her own lens. In her January 2023 research log, she wrote, "The family is struggling. Grandmother Moon's calls have taken on what I can only describe as a mournful quality. Yesterday, Kiska brought me a dead rockfish, not to eat but as what seemed like a gift. She held it delicately in her teeth and released it directly in front of me. This level of cross-species empathy is unprecedented. They're not just hunting partners anymore, they see me as someone to share with." Dr. Marcus Chin, Vanessa's research partner, noticed more troubling changes. Starting in spring 2023, K-pod's behavior around Vanessa shifted. They would abandon hunting to interact with her. I observed Tsunami, the adult male, performing aggressive displays when Vanessa would prepare to leave the water. These weren't playful, they were the same intimidation behaviors males use to control pod movement. Vanessa saw it as possessive affection. I saw it as a predator testing boundaries. The situation escalated in August 2023 when Vanessa made what many experts consider her fatal mistake. During a dive, Kiska's 6-month-old calf became entangled in abandoned fishing gear. Vanessa, against all protocols, intervened directly. She spent nearly an hour carefully cutting the netting away while Kiska and 3 other adults circled. The rescue was successful, but it fundamentally changed the pod's perception of Vanessa. Marine mammal behaviorist Dr. Ingrid Visser, who reviewed the footage, explained, "In orca society, touching another's calf is either an act of extreme trust reserved for close family or an act of aggression. By saving that calf, Vanessa inserted herself into their social hierarchy in a way we don't fully understand." The pod's subsequent behavior suggests they may have categorized her as something between family and resource, a dangerous ambiguity when dealing with apex predators. Following the calf rescue, K-pod's behavior became increasingly possessive of Vanessa. They would appear at the research station daily, vocalizing, until she entered the water. If she didn't dive, they would breach repeatedly, the massive splashes soaking the research vessel's deck. Tsunami began exhibiting what researchers call herding behavior, positioning himself between Vanessa and the boat when she attempted to return from. This September brought more warning signs. K-pod had been observed engaging in what marine biologists term surplus killing, hunting more prey than they could consume. This behavior, while documented in orcas, typically indicates high stress or social disruption. Even more concerning, they began practicing hunting techniques typically reserved for marine mammal prey, not their usual salmon targets. Trail cameras captured them, rehearsing the wave wash technique used to knock seals off ice floes, despite no seals being present in their territory. Dr. Lance Barrett Leonard, senior marine mammal scientist at the Ocean Wise Conservation Association, tried one final intervention 3 weeks before Vanessa's death. He presented video evidence of K-pod exhibiting predatory behavior towards sea lions, unusual for fish-eating northern residents. They're behaviorally breaking down, he warned Vanessa. Food stress is causing them to blur the lines between prey categories. Need to establish distance immediately. His warning fell on deaf ears. Vanessa responded that the pod was simply expanding their cultural knowledge, and that her presence was a stabilizing influence during a difficult transition. The final red flag came just 5 days before the fatal encounter. During a routine dive, Kiska performed what Vanessa described in her notes as a playful bump. The HD underwater footage tells a different story. The 4,000-pound orca struck Vanessa with enough force to knock her respirator loose and send her spinning through the water. Rather than showing concern for a potentially injured pod member, Kiska circled with her mouth open, classic predatory positioning. Only Vanessa's emergency surface and Marcus's quick action in pulling her aboard prevented an earlier tragedy. Still, Vanessa refused to see the danger. Her final research log entry, written the night before her death, reads, K-Pod is evolving, transcending the artificial boundaries we've imposed between human and cetacean consciousness. Tomorrow's dive will be special, Grandmother Moon vocalized. In a pattern I've never recorded before. I believe she's inviting me to witness something profound. After 3 years, I'm no longer just an observer. I'm part of their story now. She was right about being part of their story. But it wasn't the story she thought she was writing. As Dr. Ford would later testify at the inquest, Vanessa Doyle made the fatal error many passionate researchers make. She forgot that to truly respect wild animals, we must respect their nature. And the nature of an orca, regardless of how we romanticize them, is that of an apex predator perfectly designed to kill. In the 6 weeks leading up to October 15, 2023, the behavioral changes in K-Pod became impossible to ignore, even for those who wanted to believe in Vanessa's vision of interspecies harmony. The transformation wasn't sudden, it was a gradual escalation that in hindsight reads like a countdown to catastrophe. September had been unusually warm, disrupting the salmon runs that K-Pod depended on. Underwater cameras at the Johnstone Strait monitoring station recorded the pod making unsuccessful hunting passes for days at a time. Dr. Marcus Chin documented 17 separate feeding attempts over a 72-hour period in late September, with only 2 resulting in successful kills. For a pod that typically needed 300 to 400 pounds of fish per day per adult, this spelled crisis. Vanessa noticed the changes but interpreted them through her unwavering belief in the pod's benevolence. On September 28, she wrote in her research log, "The family is adapting to challenging circumstances with remarkable grace. Kiska approached me today with what I can only describe as vulnerability in her eyes. She vocalized in a pattern I've designated as seeking comfort. When I reached out my hands, pressed her rostrum against it for nearly 30 seconds. We are transcending the researcher-subject paradigm." But other observers saw something far more ominous. Captain Robert McKay, who had piloted research vessels in these waters for 27 years, filed an official concern with the Marine Mammal Center on October 1. His report stated, Dr. Doyle's interactions with K-Pod have become dangerous. Today, the adult male, Tsunami, physically prevented her from returning to the vessel by positioning his body between her and the dive ladder. This went on for approximately 12 minutes. Dr. Doyle laughed it off as playful behavior, but I've seen similar positioning when orcas corner prey against ice floes. I am refusing to captain further expeditions unless safety protocols are enforced. The Marine Mammal Center's director, Dr. Sarah Patterson, immediately scheduled a review meeting. Present were 5 senior researchers, including Dr. Lance Barrett Leonard and Dr. John Ford. The consensus was unanimous. Vanessa needed to take a minimum 6-month break from direct water contact with K-Pod. Dr. Patterson recalls, Vanessa sat through our presentation of evidence, aggressive displays, possessive behavior, signs of food stress, and when we finished, she simply said, "You don't understand them like I do." It was like talking to someone in a cult. The orcas had become her religion. The intervention failed. Vanessa agreed to increased safety protocols but refused to stop her in-water research. She did make one concession: would wear a new emergency GPS beacon that could alert the Coast Guard with one button press. It was a decision that would later provide crucial evidence but ultimately couldn't save her life. On October 7th, 8 days before her death, something unprecedented happened. K-Pod, which had maintained a territory range of roughly 200 square miles for decades, suddenly appeared 50 miles south of their usual grounds. They were following Vanessa. She had taken a weekend off to visit her parents in Seattle, and marine traffic reports confirmed K-Pod had been spotted in Puget Sound, dangerously close to shipping lanes they typically avoided. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, witnessed what happened next. We were having breakfast on the waterfront when Vanessa suddenly stood up, staring at the water. Then we saw them, 3 huge dorsal fins cutting through the waves maybe 200 yards from shore. Vanessa started crying. She said, "They found me. They need me." She left immediately, cutting her visit short by 2 days. I begged her to see what was happening, but she just kept saying, "They need me," over and over. The pod's journey to find Vanessa had taken them through waters contaminated with heavy boat traffic and pollution. When she returned to the research station and entered the water on October 8th, she documented severe rake marks on several pod members, evidence of aggressive interactions with other orcas or perhaps boat strikes. Grandmother Moon, the matriarch, had a fresh wound across her dorsal fin that was bleeding into the water. Instead of recognizing these injuries as evidence of the pod's deteriorating judgment, Vanessa saw only confirmation of their bond. Her October 8th log entry reads, "They risked everything to find me. The family is under extreme stress, physical and emotional. Kiska's calf shows signs of malnutrition. Storm Singer has become increasingly aggressive toward her own offspring. The pod dynamics are fracturing. They need stability. They need me." Dr. Marcus Chen tried one final time to intervene on October 10th. I showed her thermal imaging from the last week. The pod's hunting patterns had completely broken down. They were moving erratically, splitting into unusual subgroups, exhibiting what we call desperation behaviors. Pointed out that Tsunami had begun jaw-popping at the research vessel itself, not at Vanessa, at the actual boat. That's pure aggression. Looked at the data and said, "They're grieving. Can't you see? They're grieving for the ocean we've destroyed." She wasn't wrong about the environmental crisis, but she was blind to the immediate danger. The next day brought the most chilling warning of all. October 11th's dive footage, recovered from the underwater cameras, shows something that made even seasoned researchers gasp during the inquest. At 11:47 a.m., as Vanessa swam with Kiska and her calf, 3 other pod members, Storm Singer, Raven, and a juvenile named Echo, began circling her in what marine biologists recognize as a hunting formation. They swam in perfect synchronization, creating a vortex that gradually tightened around Vanessa. For 13 minutes, she was at the center of what Dr. Ingrid Visser would later call a textbook prey encirclement. The Orcas echolocation clicks increased to a frequency typically reserved for stunning fish. Vanessa, incredibly, seemed oblivious to the danger. Her dive notes describe the encounter as the pod performing a ceremonial dance of acceptance. She even removed her regulator briefly to vocalize back to them, a breach of every safety protocol in the book. Only the sudden appearance of a Coast Guard vessel, investigating reports of orcas in shipping lanes, broke the formation. The orcas scattered, but underwater microphones captured a vocalization from Tsunami that Dr. Ford would later classify as a frustration call identical to those made when prey escapes. That evening, Vanessa's research assistant, Jennifer Huang, found her reviewing the footage in the lab. Jennifer later testified, she was watching the encirclement video over and over, tears streaming down her face. "I thought she'd finally recognized the danger. Then she said, 'They're trying to tell me something important. I just need to understand.'" I asked her what would happen if they were actually hunting her. looked at me with absolute certainty and said, "They would never. I'm family." On October 12th, 3 days before her death, Vanessa made a decision that sealed her fate. She dismissed the safety divers who had been accompanying her since the intervention meeting. Her official reason was that additional human presence was disrupting the pod's natural behavior. The real reason, revealed in her personal journal found after her death, was more disturbing. The others don't understand. Fear pollutes the water. K-pod senses it and it agitates them. Tomorrow it will be just us. Just family. The way it should be. Dr. Patterson made one last attempt to stop her. On October 13th, she arrived at the research station with official papers to suspend Vanessa's research privileges. The confrontation was heated. Vanessa accused the director of academic jealousy and species discrimination. Threatened to go public with what she called the systematic suppression of evidence for cetacean consciousness. Dr. Patterson gave her an ultimatum: accept a 6-month suspension or face permanent termination from the program. Vanessa agreed to think about it over the weekend. She promised not to dive on October 14th, to take time to consider her options. It was a lie. Boat GPS records show she took the research vessel out alone that day, spending 6 hours with K-pod. No one knows exactly what happened. During those 6 hours, Vanessa didn't file any notes or footage. But a recreational fisherman named Doug Whitman saw part of it. "I was about half a mile away when I saw this woman in the water surrounded by orcas," Whitman later told investigators. "At first I thought it was amazing, like something out of a nature documentary. Then I realized they were bumping her hard. She'd go under for 30, 40 seconds at a time. Started to motor over to help, but she must have seen me because she waved me off. Actually gave me a thumbs up like everything was fine. The last thing I saw was the biggest orca I've ever seen in my life surface right next to her. The spray from its blowhole knocked her mask off. And I swear to God, she was smiling." That night, Vanessa sent a final email to her sister Rebecca. "I know everyone thinks I've lost it. Maybe I have. But tomorrow I'm going to prove that everything I've believed, everything I've worked for, is real. K-pod and I have reached a breakthrough. After tomorrow, the world will understand that the barriers between species are constructs of our own fear. I love you. If anything happens, know that I'm exactly where I want to be." She also updated her research blog with what would be her final entry. "For 3 years, I've studied K-pod. But in the last week, I've realized they've been studying me too. Tomorrow we conclude our research together. The circle closes. The family completes. Those who understand will celebrate. Those who don't will learn. The ocean doesn't distinguish between human and orca. Tomorrow neither will we." October 14th ended with an Aurora Borealis display visible from Vancouver Island, a rare event that Vanessa had always considered good luck. She spent the evening on the deck of the Aurora, watching the green lights dance across the sky. The night watch, Tom Briggs, was the last person to speak with her. "She seemed peaceful," he recalled, "almost euphoric. She told me the lights were a sign from the pod that tomorrow would be transcendent." I asked her what she meant. She just smiled and said, "You'll see. Everyone will see." The weather forecast for October 15th called for calm seas and clear skies. Perfect diving conditions. Perfect visibility. Perfect for what Dr. Marcus Chen would later call the most preventable tragedy in the history of marine mammal research. As the sun rose on that fatal Monday morning, Pod was already waiting 300 yards from the research station. They had been vocalizing since 4 a.m. long mournful calls that hydrophones recorded, but no one was awake to hear. No one except Vanessa, who had been awake all night, preparing for what she believed would be the culmination of her life's work. Her final preparations included updating her will, backing up all her research data, and writing 13 letters to colleagues and family members. Letter ended with the same line: "The ocean knows no fear. Today, neither do I." She couldn't have been more wrong. Monday, October 15, 2023, dawned with an ethereal beauty that seemed to mock the horror that would unfold. At 5:47 a.m., the first rays of sunlight painted the waters off Vancouver Island in shades of gold and turquoise. The ocean was glassy calm, with visibility extending down nearly 60 feet, conditions marine researchers dream about. The research vessel Aurora sat anchored in Blackfish Sound, her hull gently creaking with the almost imperceptible swells. Vanessa had been up since 3:30 a.m., methodically preparing her equipment. Security camera footage from the vessel shows her moving with unusual deliberation, checking and rechecking gear she could operate blindfolded. She wore her favorite wetsuit, a custom 7mm blue and black pinnacle that she'd nicknamed Second Skin. Her movements were ritualistic, testing regulators, calibrating cameras, organizing backup equipment. At 4:15 a.m., she made herself a cup of tea and stood on the deck, staring into the darkness where K-Pod's vocalizations echoed across the water. The hydrophone recordings from that morning are haunting. K-Pod had maintained position exactly 347 yards from the Aurora throughout the night, close enough to monitor, far enough to avoid the vessel's lights. Their vocalizations were unlike anything in the 3-year study catalog. Ford would later analyze these calls, describing them as a complex pattern mixing S1 greeting calls with S10 hunting coordinations, a combination I've never observed in northern residents. At 6 a.m., Marcus Chin arrived at the vessel, expecting a normal research day. He found Vanessa already in her wetsuit, downloading overnight hydrophone data. She was electric, Marcus later testified. There was something in her eyes, not fear, not excitement, but something else. Resolution, maybe. Like someone who'd made a decision they couldn't come back from. He noticed she'd already prepped 3 cameras instead of the usual 2, and had attached the emergency GPS beacon to her weight belt, something she usually forgot to do. Vanessa showed Marcus the overnight vocalizations. "Listen to this pattern at 4:43, she said, playing a haunting sequence of calls. "That's Grandmother Moon, but she's modulating in a way I've never recorded. And here dash," she pointed to the spectrogram, "Kiska responds with what sounds like my name. Not similar to my name. My actual name. They're calling me Marcus." Marcus tried to inject rationality. "Vanessa, that's pareidolia. You're hearing patterns that aren't there. Like seeing faces in clouds." But even he had to admit the vocalizations were unusual. The pod had maintained perfect formation all night, with Tsunami stationed as what appeared to be a sentinel, exactly between the pod and the research vessel. At 6:30 a.m., as sunlight finally illuminated the water, K-Pod began to move. The 12 orcas surfaced in perfect synchronization, their breath misting in the cool morning air. Grandmother Moon led, her scarred dorsal fin cutting through the water with purpose. Behind her, Kiska swam, with her calf tucked close, while Tsunami flanked the group's left side. They moved slowly, almost processionally, closing the distance to the Aurora to just 150 yards. Tom Briggs, the night watch officer preparing to end his shift, noticed something odd. "The birds," he told investigators. There were no birds. Usually, dawn brings hundreds of gulls looking for fishing boats. That morning, nothing. Dead silent except for the whale blows. It was like every other creature knew to stay away. At 7 a.m., Vanessa began her final equipment check. The underwater cameras show her testing each piece of gear with exceptional thoroughness. She spent 12 minutes adjusting her buoyancy compensator, though Marcus noted it had been perfect the day before. To replace the battery in her underwater camera twice, despite both showing full charge. She was stalling or perhaps savoring these last moments of preparation. The GoPro footage from Vanessa's mask, recovered after the attack, provides a first-person view of these crucial moments. At 7:18 a.m., she turned to Marcus and said, "If something happens today, I want you to know, this is what I choose. This is who I am." Marcus, thinking she was being typically dramatic, responded, "Nothing's going to happen except you're going to get cold and pruny like every other dive." But something was different about K-pod's behavior. As Vanessa prepared to enter the water, the pods split into an unusual formation. Normally, they maintained family groupings, mothers with calves, juveniles playing together, adult males patrolling the periphery. This morning, formed what marine biologists call a rosette, a circular formation typically seen during coordinated hunting of large prey. At 7:31 a.m., Vanessa entered the water. The shock of the 48-degree Pacific never showed on her face. She descended slowly, camera ready, recording, breathing steadily through her regulator. The visibility was extraordinary. Her footage shows kelp forests swaying in the gentle current, shafts of sunlight creating cathedral-like columns in the water. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, even magical. K-pod was waiting at 30 feet depth. They hung motionless in the water, a behavior called logging that orcas usually reserve for rest. But these weren't resting whales. The underwater footage shows 12 pairs of eyes tracking Vanessa's descent with unwavering focus. Grandmother Moon floated vertically, her massive head oriented toward Vanessa. The matriarch's eye, ancient and knowing, never blinked. At 7:34 a.m., Vanessa reached the pod's depth and stabilized her buoyancy. 4:47 seconds, nothing moved except the kelp. Predator and researcher regarded each other across 30 feet of crystal-clear water. Then Kiska broke formation. The 23-foot female glided forward, with barely a tail movement, approaching Vanessa with what appeared to be calm curiosity. Vanessa's camera captured every detail of Kiska's approach. The orca's movements were deliberate, almost cautious. She circled Vanessa twice at a distance of 10 feet, echolocating constantly. The clicks were so powerful they're audible on the camera audio, creating an alien soundtrack to the encounter. Vanessa remained perfectly still, arms at her sides, demonstrating the submissive posture she'd always maintained with the pod. At 7:36 a.m., Kiska made contact. She brushed against Vanessa with her pectoral fin, a behavior documented hundreds of times over their 3-year relationship. But this time was different. The contact was firmer, more deliberate. Kiska's 6,000-pound body nudged Vanessa hard, enough to spin her in the water. Vanessa's breathing, audible on the recording, remained steady. She even laughed, the sound distorted through her regulator but unmistakably joyful. Then Tsunami moved. The massive bull, weighing over 12,000 pounds, had been holding position 40 feet away. His approach wasn't the gentle glide of Kiska, it was direct, powerful, purposeful. He passed within inches of Vanessa, his wake tumbling her through the water. Marcus, watching from the boat's underwater viewing panel, radioed, "Vanessa, that looked aggressive. Maybe come up for a reset." Her response, captured on both radio and camera audio, "Negative. They're testing boundaries. This is exactly what we've been waiting for." Maintaining position. At 7:39 a.m., the pod's behavior shifted dramatically. Storm Singer and her juvenile daughter Raven began a rapid circle around Vanessa, swimming in opposite directions. Their speed increased with each pass, creating a disorienting vortex of black and white bodies. The water churned with their movement, kelp and debris swirling in the artificial current. This was carousel feeding behavior, a technique orcas use to disorient schools of fish before striking. Vanessa's breathing finally showed stress. The regulators captured shorter, sharper inhalations. But she held position even as the circling orcas tightened their pattern. Her camera swung wildly, trying to track the movement, catching glimpses of massive bodies flashing past. At one point, the footage clearly shows Raven's open mouth passing within 2 feet of Vanessa's legs, rows of conical teeth visible in the artificial light. At 7:41 a.m., Grandmother Moon vocalized. The matriarch's call was deep, resonant, and immediately answered by all pod members. The circling stopped instantly. For a moment, the underwater world went silent except for Vanessa's breathing and the distant sound of the Aurora's generator. The pod hung motionless again, but their positioning had changed. They'd formed a perfect sphere around Vanessa, each animal equidistant, facing inward. Marcus's voice crackled over the radio. Vanessa, I don't like this. You're completely surrounded. Begin ascent now. The camera shows Vanessa looking up toward the surface, then at each orca in turn. Her hand moved to the emergency beacon on her weight belt, but didn't activate it. Instead, she did something that would haunt investigators. She removed her regulator and vocalized into the water. The sound she made wasn't random. It was a perfect mimicry of Kiska's signature call, practiced over years of study. The pod's reaction was instantaneous. 12 orcas exploded into motion simultaneously. The underwater footage becomes chaotic, a tornado of black and white bodies, massive tail flukes, the deafening sound of echolocation clicks increasing to weapons-grade intensity. Vanessa spun in the center of this maelstrom, her regulator knocked from her mouth, her mask filling with water. At 7:43 a.m., first contact was made. The footage, frame-by-frame analysis would later reveal, shows Storm Singer's rostrum striking Vanessa's midsection. The impact was calculated not full force, but enough to expel the air from her lungs in an explosion of bubbles. Vanessa's hand finally moved to the beacon, but tsunami was already there. The massive bull's jaws closed on her equipment belt with surgical precision, crushing the beacon and weight system simultaneously. The final seconds of helmet camera footage are difficult to watch. Vanessa, now without weights, began an uncontrolled ascent toward the surface. The pod moved with her, their formation shifting from sphere to column. Kiska, the orca Vanessa had called friend, had named Pure, rose directly beneath her. The last clear frame shows Kiska's jaws opening, her pink tongue visible against the stark white of her teeth. Then the camera cut out. But the story was far from over. At 7:44 a.m.
and 16 seconds, Marcus screamed into the radio, "Emergency! Vanessa is under attack. Mayday! Mayday!" The peaceful morning had become a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. The surface of Blackfish Sound exploded at 7:44 a.m. and 23 seconds. Marcus Chen, watching in horror from the Aurora's observation deck, saw Vanessa breach the water like a missile, her body arcing 15 feet into the air. For a split second, she seemed suspended against the morning sky, arms outstretched, wetsuit torn across her midsection. Then Kiska erupted beneath her. The orca's massive jaws clamped around Vanessa's waist, teeth penetrating the 7mm neoprene like tissue paper. Time seemed to slow for those witnessing the attack. Tom Briggs, still on deck, dropped his coffee mug, the ceramic shattering on impact, but the sound lost in the chaos. The GoPro camera mounted on the Aurora's stern captured everything in merciless 4K resolution. Vanessa's face, visible for just a moment before impact, showed not terror but something worse, a flash of profound betrayal, the recognition that everything she'd believed was catastrophically wrong. Kiska's re-entry sent a geyser of water 30 feet high, diamonds of spray catching the morning sun in a grotesque parody of beauty. Vanessa disappeared beneath the surface, still locked in the orca's jaws. The water where they'd vanished turned dark, a spreading stain that Marcus would later describe as the color of everything I'd failed to prevent. Beneath the surface, the pod had transformed into a coordinated killing machine. Tsunami struck next, his massive bulk slamming into Vanessa. From the side, the impact captured by the Aurora's underwater cameras. The force separated her from Kiska's grip momentarily, but only to pass her to Storm Singer, who caught Vanessa's left arm in her jaws. The crack of breaking bone was audible even through the water, picked up by hydrophones that had recorded 3 years of what Vanessa had believed was friendship. Dr. Michael Lawson, a trauma surgeon who later reviewed the footage for the inquest, provided clinical analysis of the attack dynamics. The orcas demonstrated textbook pack hunting behavior. Each strike was calculated to disable while maintaining prey control. The initial bite to the midsection targeted the body's center mass. The secondary strike to the arm eliminated defensive capability. This wasn't frenzied. It was methodical, practiced, efficient. Vanessa's emergency training kicked in despite the catastrophic trauma. Security footage shows her right hand forming a fist, the universal diving signal for distress, even as Storm Singer shook her like a dog with a toy. Her legs kicked with surprising strength, not randomly but in the trained pattern of a surface swim. She was fighting, but she was fighting 12,000 years of evolved predatory perfection. At 7:45 a.m. and 8 seconds, 45 seconds into the attack, Vanessa managed something extraordinary. As Storm Singer adjusted her grip, Vanessa broke free momentarily and actually reached the surface. Marcus screamed her name as her head broke through, her mask gone, blood streaming from her nose and mouth. For 3 seconds, she breathed. The hydrophones captured her voice. Not a scream, but a single word. Why? Then Grandmother Moon, the matriarch who had stayed peripheral to the initial attack, made her move. The senior female rose beneath Vanessa, with the slow certainty of a submarine surfacing. Her approach wasn't aggressive, it was almost gentle. She nudged Vanessa with her rostrum, pushing her up and out of the water again. For a horrifying moment, Vanessa balanced on the orca's head, arms windmilling for balance. Before, Grandmother Moon opened her massive jaws and pulled her back under. The underwater cameras revealed the full horror of what happened next. The pod began a behavior marine biologists call prey sharing, passing Vanessa between them in a grotesque game. Raven, the juvenile, attempted to participate but was rebuffed by the adults with aggressive jaw pops. This was teaching, but not the kind Vanessa had ever imagined. The pod was demonstrating hunting techniques to their young using the woman who had loved them. Marcus had launched the emergency Zodiac by 7:46 a.m., but getting to Vanessa was impossible. The pod had formed a tight circle around their prey bodies, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle and malice. He tried to break through with the boat, but tsunami surfaced directly in front of him, spy-hopping to his full height. The message was clear: stay back. I've never felt so helpless, Marcus would later testify, tears streaming down his face. I could see her in the center of them, still moving, still alive. Her wetsuit was shredded. The water around her was red, but she was conscious. She looked right at me, and I couldn't do anything. The attack entered a new phase at 7:47 a.m. The orcas began exhibiting the tenderizing behavior typically reserved for seal prey launching Vanessa into the air repeatedly, letting her crash back into the water. Each impact further traumatized her already catastrophic injuries. Dr. Lawson's analysis noted, the repeated impacts would have caused massive internal injuries, ruptured organs, collapsed lungs, cerebral hemorrhaging. That she remained conscious through this is a testament to the human body's incredible survival instinct. Jennifer Huang, Vanessa's research assistant, had been in the Aurora's communication room when the attack began. She immediately radioed the Coast Guard, her training overcoming her horror. The recorded emergency call captures her professional demeanor cracking. Coast Guard. Coast Guard, this is research vessel Aurora. We have a researcher in the water under attack by orcas. Repeat, Orca attack in progress. She's... Oh God, they're throwing her. Please, we need immediate assistance. Position 48.5 north, 123.4 west. The Coast Guard response was swift but would prove futile. The nearest vessel was 17 minutes away, an eternity in the water with actively hunting orcas. The dispatcher maintained protocol, asking for details about the victim's condition. Jennifer's response was barely coherent. They're passing her between them. There's so much blood. Please hurry. Please. At 7:48 a.m., the pod's behavior shifted again. They stopped the aerial attacks and pulled Vanessa under, deeper than before. The underwater cameras lost sight of them as they descended beyond the 60-foot visibility range. For 90 seconds, the surface went still except for a widening slick of blood and debris. Marcus circled helplessly in the Zodiac, scanning the water. Tom Briggs had grabbed the vessel's seal bombs, explosive devices used to deter marine mammals, but knew they were useless. You can't deter animals that have already tasted blood. Then, at 7:49 a.m. and 30 seconds, the pod surfaced in explosion of spray. They came up as one unit.
Tight formation, moving fast. In their center, barely visible between the massive bodies, was Vanessa, or what remained of her. The morning sun illuminated a scene from prehistoric. Nightmares, apex predators in their element, demonstrating why they'd survived every ocean change for millions of years. Kiska broke from the group, swimming directly toward the Aurora with something in her mouth. As she approached, Marcus realized with dawning horror what she carried: Vanessa's emergency beacon, the crush device still attached to a fragment of weight belt. The Orca circled the Zodiac once, twice, then released the beacon to float on the surface before rejoining her pod. It was a message, Marcus would later say. Kiska knew exactly what that beacon meant. She was showing us that they'd deliberately disabled Vanessa's safety equipment. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or accidental aggression. They knew exactly who she was and exactly what they were doing. The final phase of the attack began at 7:50 a.m. The pod had moved 200 yards from the Aurora, but still within camera range. It formed a behavior pattern reserved for their most challenging prey, a synchronized diving attack where multiple orcas strike from below. Simultaneously, Vanessa, somehow still alive, was held at the surface by Storm Singer and Raven, her body limp but her chest still showing movement. Tsunami, Grandmother Moon, and 3 other adults dove deep. The surface cameras lost them, but the hydrophones tracked their descent. Powerful echolocation clicks bouncing off the seafloor 60 feet below. They stayed down for 30 seconds, positioning themselves. With perfect coordination, they rose. The impact was volcanic. 5 orcas, representing over 40,000 pounds of predator, struck from below at maximum velocity. The surface erupted in a chaos of water, blood, and foam. When the spray cleared, Vanessa Doyle was gone. Not sinking, not floating, simply erased from existence by forces that rendered the human body into its component particles. The pod circled the impact site for another 3 minutes, their behavior shifting from hunt mode to what marine biologists recognize as post-kill excitement. They vocalized in patterns never before recorded, spy-hopped repeatedly, and exhibited sexual displays common after successful hunts. The transformation from the gentle giants Vanessa had loved to revealed predators was complete. At 7:54 a.m., 9 minutes and 44 seconds after the attack began, K-Pod began moving north. They traveled in their typical formation. Grandmother Moon leading, mothers with calves in the center, Tsunami flanking. To any observer who hadn't witnessed the previous 10 minutes, they looked like what Vanessa had always claimed they were, a peaceful family of fish-eating orcas going about their daily lives. They left behind a crime scene that would haunt everyone who saw it. The water was stained red in a 100-foot radius. Fragments of wetsuit, diving equipment, and things investigators would decline to specify in public reports floated on the surface. The Aurora's hydrophones continued recording, capturing the retreating pod's vocalizations, sounds that expert analysis would later identify as satisfaction calls, typically made after successful feeding. Marcus Chin sat in the Zodiac for another 10 minutes, circling the debris field, calling Vanessa's name into the indifferent ocean. His desperate cries echoed across the water, unanswered except by the distant exhalations of K-Pod as they disappeared around the northern point of the island. The morning that had begun with such promise had become a tableau of humanity's ultimate powerlessness against nature. Tom Briggs would later say, "In 40 years on these waters, I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't just that they killed her, it was how they did. Coordinated, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Like they'd been planning it. Like they'd been waiting for the right moment. And Vanessa gave them that moment when she made that sound, when she tried to speak their language. She crossed a line that should never be crossed." The official time of death would be listed as 7:52 a.m., though the exact moment Vanessa Doyle ceased to exist was lost in the churning chaos of the attack. What remained was silence, the terrible silence of the after, broken only by the Aurora's engines and the distant calls of K-Pod. Celebrating in the language Vanessa had dedicated her life to understanding but fatally misinterpreted. At 7:56 a.m., 2 minutes after K-Pod disappeared around the northern point, the first Coast Guard response vessel rounded the southern approach to Blackfish Sound. The 45-foot response boat medium, designation CG 45618, pushed at maximum speed, its twin diesel engines screaming. Chief Petty Officer Janet Rodriguez had been monitoring the radio traffic, and her crew was prepared for a rescue operation. They were not prepared for what they found. "Jesus Christ," Seaman David Park whispered as they entered the debris field. The water looked like a war zone, a slick of blood so extensive it had attracted hundreds of seabirds that had been absent all morning. Gulls dove and wheeled through the air, their cries creating a cacophony that seemed almost celebratory. Rodriguez immediately ordered them dispersed with the water cannon, unable to stomach their feeding on what remained. Marcus Chen was still circling in the Zodiac, his movements mechanical, eyes vacant with shock. When the Coast Guard vessel pulled alongside, didn't respond to their hails. Petty Officer Michelle Winters had to physically board the Zodiac to get his attention. "Sir, we need to get you to safety." "Where's the victim?" Marcus just pointed at the water, at the spreading stain, at the absence where a person should have been. The Aurora's emergency beacon had automatically triggered when Vanessa's unit was destroyed, sending GPS coordinates to the Marine Emergency Response Center. By 8:03 a.m., the airspace above Blackfish Sound was filling with aircraft. A Coast Guard HH-65 Dolphin helicopter arrived first, its crew immediately beginning a search pattern. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander Brad Stevens, would later report, "We've done hundreds of marine searches. This was different. There was no point of last contact, no debris trail to follow. Just evidence. Extensive evidence." On the Aurora, Jennifer Huang had managed to maintain enough composure to preserve crucial evidence. She'd locked down all recording equipment, ensuring no data could be accidentally erased. The hydrophones continued capturing audio, including the distant vocalizations of K-Pod as they moved north. She'd also begun the grim task of photographing the scene, understanding that every detail would be crucial for the investigation that would follow. The Royal Canadian Marine Police arrived at 8:11 a.m., their vessel Inkster cutting through the morning chop with authority. Sergeant Michael Dermott, a 20-year veteran of marine incidents, took command of the scene. His first observation, recorded in his official report, the attack site covered approximately 300 square meters. Biological matter and personal effects were dispersed throughout. Recovery of remains would require extensive grid search utilizing dive teams and specialized equipment. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, the medical examiner for the Maritime District, was airlifted to the scene by 8:27 a.m. Her initial assessment was complicated by the total destruction of the victim. "In 30 years of marine fatalities, I'd never encountered remains so thoroughly dispersed," she would testify. "Orca predation on humans is so rare that we had no protocols. We were essentially treating this as we would an aircraft crash. At sea, collecting everything, no matter how small." The dive team arrived at 8:35 a.m. For highly trained recovery specialists who thought they'd seen everything the ocean could do to a human body. Lead diver Sergeant Emma Collins descended first, the underwater visibility still exceptional despite the surface disturbance. What she found below defied her experience. "The orcas had been thorough," she reported. "There were impact marks on the seafloor, depressions where the victim had been driven down repeatedly. We found fragments of equipment embedded in the mud 20 feet below the surface. The force involved was extraordinary." Wildlife enforcement officers faced an unprecedented challenge. Dr. Lance Barrett Leonard arrived by float plane at 8:45 a.m. to help coordinate the response. K-Pod needed to be located and assessed, but the legal framework for dealing with a fatal orca attack was non-existent. "We couldn't treat them like problem bears or aggressive sharks," he explained. These were northern residents, a threatened population. Every individual was precious to the species' survival. But they'd also just killed a human being in a prolonged, deliberate attack. The search for K-Pod began immediately. A Department of Fisheries and Oceans vessel equipped with long-range hydrophones began tracking their northern movement. The pod was located at 9:15 a.m., 12 miles from the attack site, behaving completely normally. They were fishing, successfully catching salmon in a coordinated hunt that bore eerie similarities to their earlier tactics. Back at the scene, the recovery operation expanded. Additional Coast Guard vessels arrived to establish a perimeter, keeping civilian boats at distance. The attack had occurred in a popular whale-watching area, and tour operators were already heading out with customers eager to see orcas. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People paying hundreds of dollars to swim with the same species that had just demonstrated their apex predator capabilities. Tom Briggs provided crucial testimony to investigators. He'd managed to overcome his shock enough to review the Aurora's security footage, creating a timeline of Vanessa's final morning. She knew, he told Sergeant Dermott. Looking at her movements, her preparations, she knew something was going to happen. This wasn't a surprise to her. It was almost like she was preparing for a ceremony. The Aurora itself became a crime scene. Every inch was photographed, every piece of equipment catalogued. Vanessa's cabin revealed the depths of her obsession, walls covered with photos of K-Pod, notebooks filled with thousands of pages of observations, drawings of individual orcas with names and personality descriptions that read more like family portraits than scientific documentation. Investigators found her laptop still open to her final research entry, typed at 3:47 a.m. that morning. Today I joined them completely. No more barriers. No more distance. Today I prove that love transcends species, that understanding bridges the gap between human and cetacean. If I don't return, know that I chose this. I chose them. And they chose me. By 9:30 a.m., a temporary command center had been established on the Aurora's deck. Multiple agencies coordinated their response. Coast Guard, Marine Police, Fisheries and Oceans, the Coroner's Office, and Wildlife Enforcement. The complexity of the situation was unprecedented, a fatal wildlife attack in federal waters involving a protected species and a researcher who may have deliberately provoked the encounter. The medical team faced a grim task. Dr. Yamamoto supervised the careful collection of remains, each fragment photographed, catalogued, and preserved. The violence of the attack meant that positive identification would require DNA analysis. Vanessa's hairbrush and toothbrush were collected from her cabin for comparison. The process was painstaking, with diverse working in shifts to search the seafloor for any recoverable evidence. Marcus Chen was treated for shock but refused to leave the scene. He provided investigators with 3 years of research data, including hundreds of hours of footage showing Vanessa's interactions with K-Pod. She loved them, he repeated over and over. She genuinely loved them. And I think maybe they loved her too. Just not in any way a human could survive. At 10 a.m., the first media helicopters appeared on the horizon. News of the attack had leaked, and within hours it would be international headlines. The Coast Guard established a no-fly zone to protect the investigation, but long-lens cameras were already capturing images of the blood-stained water, the recovery boats, the general horror of the scene. Wildlife officers made a crucial decision. K-Pod would not be destroyed or relocated. Dr. Barrett Leonard argued successfully that this was an isolated incident involving a researcher who had repeatedly violated safety protocols. These animals were behaving naturally, he stated. Doyle created an artificial situation that triggered predatory responses. Destroying the pod would be both ecologically irresponsible and scientifically unjustified. The search continued throughout the day. By noon, recovery teams had collected enough material for positive identification. Dr. Yamamoto's preliminary report, filed at 2:30 p.m., was stark in its clinical language. Death by massive trauma consistent with orca predation. Injuries include but not limited to complete skeletal disruption, multiple penetrating wounds consistent with orca dentition, evidence of extreme blunt force trauma. Death would have occurred within minutes of initial attack. The human response to the tragedy was immediate and complex. Vanessa's family arrived by chartered plane at 3 p.m. Her parents, David and Patricia Doyle, aged visibly as Sergeant Dermott explained what had happened. Her sister Rebecca collapsed when shown the last email Vanessa had sent. The family requested to visit the site, a request that was gently denied given the ongoing recovery operations. Marine mammal experts from around the world began arriving. It represented a watershed moment in human-orca interactions. Ingrid Visser flew in from New Zealand. Dr. John Ford expanded his on-site investigation, and researchers from Norway, Iceland, and Russia came to study what had gone wrong. The consensus was forming. This wasn't a random attack or a case of mistaken identity. K-Pod had killed Vanessa Doyle deliberately, with full knowledge of what they were doing. By sunset on October 15th, the immediate emergency response was winding down. The blood had dissipated, the debris had been collected, and the water looked deceptively normal again. K-Pod was tracked moving through their traditional territory, hunting salmon, socializing, showing no signs of unusual behavior. It was as if the morning's horror had never happened. The Aurora was towed back to port, sealed as evidence. The research station that had been Vanessa's second home for 3 years was shut down indefinitely. Equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars sat idle, hydrophones continued recording empty water, and the dreams of a young woman who thought she could bridge the gap between species floated in fragments on the evening tide. The final official act of October 15th was the formal identification of remains. At 11:47 p.m., using DNA comparison, the Maritime District Coroner confirmed that the recovered biological material was that of Dr. Vanessa Marie Doyle, age 31, marine biologist, orca researcher, and victim of the first fatal orca attack on a human in recorded history. The woman who had dedicated her life to understanding these magnificent predators had become, in the end, simply prey. The aftermath of Vanessa Doyle's death sent shockwaves through multiple communities, scientific, environmental, and personal. In the days following October 15, 2023, the full scope of the tragedy began to unfold, revealing not just the loss of a brilliant researcher but the shattering of fundamental assumptions about human-wildlife relationships. At Vancouver General Hospital, the medical examiner's team faced an unprecedented challenge. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto worked with a forensic reconstruction specialist to piece together what had happened based on the recovered remains. The final autopsy report, released 3 weeks after the attack, painted a clinical picture of nature's brutality. The cause of death was listed as massive polytrauma secondary to cetacean predation, with contributing factors including catastrophic hemorrhage, multiple organ failure, and drowning. The report noted that Vanessa had likely remained conscious for several minutes during the attack, a detail that would haunt those who loved her. The Doyle family struggled to process their loss. David and Patricia Doyle held a press conference on October 18th, their grief palpable but their message surprisingly measured. "Our daughter died doing what she loved," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "We don't blame the whales. Vanessa wouldn't want us to. She understood the risks, perhaps better than anyone. What we struggle with is why she chose to take those risks, why she believed so deeply that she was safe with them." Rebecca Doyle, Vanessa's sister, took a different stance. She revealed to investigators a series of increasingly concerned text messages she'd exchanged with Vanessa in her final weeks. "She wasn't well," Rebecca stated. "The isolation, the obsession, it had consumed her. About the orcas, like they were sending her messages, like they had chosen her for something special. I tried to get her to see a therapist, but she said no one would understand the connection she'd formed." The scientific community grappled with the implications of the attack. The Marine Mammal Society held an emergency session to discuss safety protocols for cetacean research. Dr. John Ford presented his analysis of K-Pod's behavior, showing how food stress had likely triggered a breakdown in the normal behavioral boundaries between fish-eating and mammal-eating orcas. What we witnessed was not malicious, he argued. It was nature reverting to its most basic programming when pushed beyond normal limits. K-Pod itself became the subject of intense monitoring. Fisheries and Oceans Canada deployed a dedicated vessel to track the pod's movements, concerned about public safety and the pod's welfare. What they found was disturbing. In the weeks following the attack, K-Pod's hunting success rate improved dramatically. They exhibited new coordinated hunting techniques, including the carousel feeding that had been used on Vanessa. It was as if killing a large mammal had unlocked ancestral memories of more diverse hunting strategies. The decision about K-Pod's fate sparked international debate. Animal rights groups argued against any punitive measures, while public safety advocates called for the pod to be relocated or even eliminated. The Canadian government convened an expert panel, which concluded that K-Pod should remain free but under intensive monitoring. Acoustic tags were attached to Grandmother Moon, Tsunami, and Kiska during a careful operation on November 2nd. The public was warned to maintain extreme distance from this particular pod. The investigation into Vanessa's death revealed troubling patterns that extended beyond her final day. Forensic analysis of her research videos showed at least 17 instances in the month before her death where K-Pod exhibited predatory behavior toward her that she had misinterpreted or ignored. In one particularly chilling segment from October 3rd, Tsunami was seen practicing the same ramming technique that would later be used in the fatal attack, while Vanessa's notes described it as playful bonding behavior. The Pacific Marine Mammal Center faced intense scrutiny. An internal review revealed that concerns about Vanessa's safety had been raised, repeatedly but ineffectively addressed. Dr. Sarah Patterson, the center's director, resigned on November 15, accepting responsibility for failing to enforce safety protocols. I let her passion cloud my judgment, Patterson admitted. I should have shut down her research months ago. Is partly on my conscience. Legal ramifications followed swiftly. The Doyle family, despite their public statements about not blaming the whales, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Marine Mammal Center for failure to ensure researcher safety. The case would set precedents for wildlife research liability. BC launched its own investigation, ultimately fining the center $250,000 for failure to maintain a safe work environment and inadequate hazard assessment in wildlife interactions. The impact on marine tourism was immediate and severe. Whale watching operators in the Pacific Northwest reported a 60% drop in bookings following the attack. Several companies that had offered swim with orcas experiences immediately canceled their programs. The Whale Watching Association of British Columbia implemented new guidelines requiring 200-meter minimum distances from all orcas, double the previous requirement. Insurance companies began reassessing coverage for marine research activities. Several major underwriters announced they would no longer cover in-water interactions with large cetaceans. This had a chilling effect on research worldwide, with many studies being modified or canceled due to inability to obtain liability coverage. Vanessa's research, despite its tragic end, contributed to scientific understanding. Her detailed observations of K-Pod's vocalizations were published posthumously in Marine Mammal Science. The paper, co-authored by Marcus Chen, who completed her analysis, identified 13 previously unknown call types and provided evidence for dialectical variations within the pod. The work was dedicated to her memory, with it forward acknowledging both her contributions and the dangers of anthropomorphizing study subjects. The media coverage of Vanessa's death was intense and often sensationalized. Killer whale lives up to name, screamed tabloid headlines, while more serious outlets struggled to balance the tragedy with accurate science reporting. A documentary crew that had been following Vanessa's work for 2 years faced an ethical dilemma. They had footage of her final weeks that showed clear warning signs. After much debate, they released the film, The Orca Whisperer, A Love Story Gone Wrong, which won awards but was criticized by the Doyle family for exploiting their tragedy. Environmental groups found themselves in a difficult position. The attack couldn't have come at a worse time for orca conservation efforts. Southern resident orcas were critically endangered, and public sympathy was essential for protection measures. Having to explain why the same species deserved protection after killing a human required delicate messaging. The David Suzuki Foundation released a statement emphasizing that this isolated incident involving food-stressed whales and a researcher who violated safety protocols should not diminish our commitment to orca conservation. The First Nations communities of the Pacific Northwest, who had coexisted with orcas for millennia, offered a different perspective. Elder Mary Campbell of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation spoke at a memorial service for Vanessa. The Kakawakw, orcas, are not our friends. They are not our enemies. They are relatives who must be respected from a distance. This young woman forgot that respect requires boundaries. The whales reminded her, in their way. Marcus Chen struggled with survivor's guilt and PTSD. He took a leave of absence from research, unable to return to the water. In therapy sessions, he revealed the depth of his trauma. I can still see her face in those last moments. The realization in her eyes. She truly believed they loved her, right up until the second they attacked. How do you process that? How do you reconcile that level of betrayal by nature itself? 6 months after the attack, a memorial was erected at Telegraph Cove, overlooking the waters where Vanessa died. The bronze plaque read, Dr. Vanessa Marie Doyle 1992 to 2023. She loved the ocean and its creatures with boundless passion. May her dedication to understanding inspire us, and her fate remind us that nature demands our respect, not our assumptions. The memorial became a pilgrimage site for marine biology. Students, a sobering reminder of the line between scientific observation and dangerous anthropomorphism. The Doyle family established the Vanessa Doyle Foundation for Safe Marine Research, dedicated to developing technology that would allow cetacean research without direct water contact. Their first grant funded advanced drone systems and underwater ROVs that could collect the same data Vanessa had risked her life to gather. She doesn't have to be the last person to die for this science, David Doyle said at the Foundation's launch. K-Pod continued to thrive in the months following the attack. The acoustic tags revealed that they had expanded their territory and were successfully hunting in areas they hadn't visited in decades. Most disturbing to researchers, they began exhibiting hunting behaviors previously seen only in transient orcas, the mammal-eating ecotype. It was as if killing Vanessa had awakened dormant instincts, blurring the behavioral lines that had defined northern residents for generations. A year after the attack, on October 15, 2024, a gathering was held at the University of Washington's Friday Harbor Laboratories. Friends and family came together to remember Vanessa and discuss the future of human cetacean research. Dr. Ingrid Visser gave the keynote address. Vanessa Doyle pushed boundaries because she believed in the possibility of interspecies communication. She was wrong about the nature of that communication, but not about its existence. The orcas did communicate with her in the end. They told her, in the clearest possible terms, that they are not what we imagine them to be. They are not cruel, but neither are they kind. They simply are. And that's the lesson written in blood that October morning. The legal proceedings concluded with a settlement that remained confidential but was rumored to be in the millions. The Pacific Marine Mammal Center restructured completely, implementing rigid safety protocols that some researchers complained made meaningful cetacean studies impossible. The pendulum had swung from dangerous familiarity to perhaps excessive caution. As the second anniversary of the attack approached, K-Pod was still monitored continuously. They had fully integrated mammal hunting into their behavioral repertoire, taking seals and sea lions with the same efficiency they'd once reserved for salmon. Marine biologists debated whether this was evolution in action or simply a return to ancestral behaviors. What was undeniable was that Vanessa Doyle's death had changed them, just as profoundly as it had changed everyone who knew her. The last words in this chapter of the tragedy belong to Patricia Doyle, spoken at her daughter's memorial service. Vanessa believed love could transcend species. Perhaps it can. But love and safety are not the same thing. The ocean loved her in its way. It gave her purpose, joy, and, ultimately, it took her home. We must remember that nature's love is not human love. It plays by different rules. And those rules are written in tooth and claw, no matter how much we wish otherwise. The attack on Vanessa Doyle became a watershed moment for the scientific community, prompting unprecedented analysis from experts across multiple disciplines. In the months following her death, marine biologists, animal psychologists, medical professionals, and safety experts converged to dissect every aspect of the tragedy, seeking to understand how a researcher's love for her subjects had transformed into their prey. Dr. John Ford, the world's leading authority on Pacific Northwest orcas,
conducted the most comprehensive analysis of K-pod's behavior. Having studied these whales for over 4 decades, his insights carried enormous weight. What we witnessed was not an aberration, he explained, during his presentation to the International Whaling Commission. It was a predictable outcome of multiple stressors converging on a highly intelligent social predator. K-pod didn't suddenly become bad whales. They revealed capabilities that were always present but normally suppressed by abundant prey and stable social structures. Ford's analysis identified 5 critical factors that contributed to the attack. First, the catastrophic decline in Chinook salmon populations had created unprecedented food stress. K-pod had lost 30% of their average body weight in the 6 months before the attack. Second, climate change had altered water temperatures, disrupting the pod's traditional hunting grounds. Third, increased boat traffic had elevated stress hormones in the whales, documented through fecal sample analysis. Fourth, Vanessa's increasingly intimate interactions had blurred critical boundaries. And fifth, her final vocalization, mimicking Kiska's signature call, had triggered what Ford termed catastrophic behavioral confusion. Dr. Ingrid Visser, who had spent 30 years studying orca intelligence, provided crucial psychological insights. Orcas possess cognitive abilities comparable to great apes, she testified. They have self-awareness, complex emotions, and sophisticated problem-solving skills. This intelligence allowed K-pod to categorize Vanessa in a unique way, neither fully human nor fully orca. When food stress pushed them toward desperate measures, she existed in a gray area that made her permissible prey. Visser's analysis of the attack footage revealed disturbing evidence of premeditation. The pod's behavior in the week before October 15th shows clear planning. They tested Vanessa's responses, practiced specific attack formations, and gradually escalated their aggressive behaviors. This wasn't a spontaneous event. It was a calculated decision by intelligent beings who understood exactly what they were doing. Marine behavioral expert Dr. Robert Pittman from the Southwest Fisheries Science Center offered a different perspective. His research on orca hunting techniques worldwide provided context for K-pod's methods. The attack sequence followed patterns we've documented in Antarctic type. Orcas hunting seals, combined with techniques used by New Zealand orcas capturing rays. K-pod essentially created a hybrid hunting strategy, suggesting they can innovate and adapt their predatory behaviors far more readily than we previously believed. The medical analysis conducted by trauma surgeon Dr. Michael Lawson was perhaps the most difficult to process. His review of the attack footage and remains provided clinical insights into the biomechanics of orca predation on humans. The initial strike delivered approximately 4,000 pounds of force per square inch, he reported. For context, that's equivalent to being hit by a small car at 30 miles per hour, but concentrated into the space of an orca's jaw. The human body simply isn't designed to withstand such forces. Dr. Lawson's timeline of injuries revealed that Vanessa likely remained conscious for 3 to 4 minutes during the attack. The initial bite caused massive internal trauma but didn't immediately damage the central nervous system. The repeated surfacing behaviors suggest the orcas understood she needed air, prolonging the encounter. This level of awareness about prey physiology indicates remarkable cognitive sophistication. Forensic psychologist Dr. Elena Martinez examined Vanessa's mental state in her final months. Her analysis of journals, videos, and interviews with colleagues painted a picture of progressive detachment from reality. Dr. Doyle exhibited symptoms consistent with what I term researcher psychosis, a condition where prolonged isolation combined with intense focus on study subjects leads to delusional thinking. She genuinely believed she had transcended the human-animal barrier. This belief system made her incapable of recognizing danger signals that would have been obvious to any objective observer. Dr. Martinez identified specific cognitive distortions in Vanessa's thinking. She consistently anthropomorphized orca behaviors, interpreting hunting practice as play and aggressive displays as affection. She exhibited confirmation bias, recording only interactions that supported her beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. Most troublingly, she had developed what Martinez termed messianic delusions, the belief that she was chosen to revolutionize human cetacean communication. Safety expert Captain James Morrison, who had developed protocols for wildlife interaction across 6 continents, provided damning analysis of the research station's procedures. Every safety rule in the book was violated, he stated. Solo diving, ignoring aggressive displays, eliminating safety equipment, dismissing backup divers. Any one of these failures could have been fatal. Combined, they created a perfect storm of vulnerability. Morrison's recommendations became industry standard: minimum 2-person dive teams for all cetacean research, mandatory protective cages. For in-water observation, automatic emergency beacons that couldn't be disabled, and psychological evaluations for researchers showing signs of overattachment to study subjects. Vanessa Doyle's death was preventable at dozens of decision points, he concluded. Her tragedy must become our teaching moment. Legal expert Dr. Patricia Wong examined the liability implications of the attack. This case fundamentally changed how we approach wildlife. Research law, she explained. Previously, assumption of risk was considered adequate protection for institutions. Now, we recognize a duty of care that extends to protecting researchers from their own compromised judgment. If someone becomes psychologically incapable of recognizing danger, their employer must intervene. The acoustic analysis of K-Pod's vocalizations before, during, and after the attack provided chilling insights. Dr. Volker Dieck, a bioacoustician who had studied orca communication for 20 years, identified what he termed hunt coordination calls beginning 3 days before the attack. These weren't random vocalizations, he explained. K-Pod was literally discussing Vanessa. We can identify individual whales participating in what appears to be a decision-making process. Grandmother Moon's calls showed specific patterns associated with matriarchal leadership during hunts. Even more disturbing, Dieck identified post-attack vocalizations that had never been recorded in northern resident populations. These calls are identical to those made by transient orcas after successful marine mammal kills. K-Pod had literally learned a new language, the language of mammal-eating orcas. This linguistic shift represents a fundamental change in their cultural identity. Veterinary pathologist Dr. Stephen Raverty, who had examined stranded orcas for decades, provided insights into K-Pod's physical condition. Necropsy results from a K-Pod member who died naturally 3 months after the attack showed physiological changes consistent with dietary shift. The stomach contents included seal remains. The teeth showed where patterns associated with marine mammal consumption, and muscle mass had increased by 15%. Killing Vanessa hadn't just changed their behavior, it had begun changing their bodies. The psychological impact on other researchers was examined by Dr. Rachel Thompson, who studied trauma in wildlife professionals. Vanessa's death created a collective trauma in the marine biology community. Researchers who had spent decades working safely with orcas suddenly questioned everything. We documented a 70% increase in anxiety disorders among cetacean researchers, with many leaving the field entirely. The image of orcas as benign ocean ambassadors was shattered, replaced by the reality of apex predators capable of strategic violence. Evolutionary biologist Dr. Craig Matkin provided perhaps the most sobering analysis. What K-Pod demonstrated wasn't an anomaly, it was evolution in real time. Faced with environmental pressures, they adapted by expanding their prey base. The fact that this prey item was a human who loved them is irrelevant from an evolutionary perspective. Natural selection doesn't care about interspecies friendships. It cares about survival. Dr. Matkin's research suggested that K-Pod's behavioral changes might spread to other northern resident pods through cultural transmission. Orcas learn from each other. If K-Pod's new hunting strategies prove successful, other pods may adopt them. We could be witnessing the birth of a new ecotype, orcas that hunt both fish and mammals, including potentially humans who enter their territory. The philosophical implications were explored by marine ethicist Dr. Thomas Chun. Vanessa Doyle believed orcas possessed moral agency, the ability to make ethical choices. If she was right, then K-Pod made a conscious choice to kill someone who loved them. If she was wrong, then she projected human values onto amoral predators. Either interpretation is profoundly disturbing. We're left with the question, is it worse if they killed her without understanding her love, or with full knowledge of it? Comparative psychologist Dr. Diana Rice, who had studied cognition across marine mammals, offered a synthesis of the various expert opinions. The attack on Vanessa Doyle forces us to reconsider our entire relationship with cetaceans. These are not gentle giants or ocean humans. They are complex, intelligent predators operating by their own rules. Vanessa's mistake was believing those rules included special provisions for humans who cared about them. The ocean doesn't recognize good intentions. As the expert analysis concluded, a consensus emerged on key points. K-Pod's attack was not random but resulted from environmental, social, and psychological factors converging catastrophically. Vanessa's anthropomorphization of the orcas had created a dangerous feedback loop where their increasing aggression was misinterpreted as affection. The pod's post-attack behavioral changes suggested that killing a human had unlocked evolutionary potentials that had been dormant in northern residents for generations. Dr. Ford provided the final expert statement that would guide future research. Vanessa Doyle died because she forgot the fundamental truth of wildlife biology. No matter how well we think we know wild animals, they remain wild. No amount of love, understanding, or communication changes their essential nature. K-Pod reminded us that orcas earned their name as killer whales not through misunderstanding, but through millions of years as the ocean's apex predator. Forget that at your peril.